In August 2017, a crack squad of two YouTubers got together in a field in the middle of England to answer your questions. That's right, Mr. Lindybeige, Lloyd and Matt Easton of scholagladiatoria here got together and answered questions which we had previously put to you on our channels and on our Facebook pages. And this is the product. This is part one of the video that Lloyd and I made together in August 2017. Enjoy. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, scholagladiatoria at Fight Camp, and I have a guest here with me. Who could it be? It's a mysterious... Who is it?
I see, sorry. You want the fencing mask off?
Ah, look. I think I know him. I recognise him off the internet.
Yes. I have a channel called Lindybeige, and we're going to answer some questions that have been sent in by viewers.
The serious questions, the questions you want answered.
Yes, strangely by us.
Yes.
Right. So what's the first question, Matt?
So with the use of mobile technology, no bits of paper, as Mr. Lloyd here wanted to use, but indeed a mobile phone, given that we're in the 21st century. Max Rimmer.
Good old Max. Hi, Max.
Yep. A Red Dwarf fan? I don't know. Max Rimmer says, which historical film do you think has struck the best balance between accuracy and storytelling?
I get asked this one a lot. I'm Saving Private Ryan. That's a good movie. It's got story, it's got decent characters, it's got good dialogue, and it's fairly stirring, and it has a sort of a point to it as well. It makes a point at the end, which is quite nice. So I'm going to go for that one.
I think for me it would have to be Braveheart. Number two, Captain. Is that supposed to be
someone
Captain?
With a very good and sensible name.
So.
It's just a little bit difficult to pronounce, but don't worry, just hold on, he's going to get this out. Get the accent.
Number two question is, Captain Titus, when do we invade France?
We don't tell them.
No, that would be ridiculous.
Yeah, obviously, but all the charges are laid in the channel. It's all fine. Don't worry, everyone.
Number three question is from Galloglass. Since Lloyd knows a lot about Hannibal, and Matt knows a lot about the Indian Mutiny, my question is, what can you say about war elephants? Did the British Empire ever face them, and if so, how did they deal with it? I can answer my bit of that question, but I'll let you go first.
Well, an odd thing that there's no evidence in the ancient world for elephants being used for what they got used for later during the Raj, which is they were essentially bulldozers and tractors. They were for lifting and ploughing and so forth. But in the ancient world, they're just Panzer Elephanten. They just seem to be for charging in a military use. And I know of absolutely no evidence whatsoever that they were used for anything other than war.
And if I remember correctly, you mentioned when we did that Time Commanders thing, you mentioned that Hannibal's elephants were African elephants, but
yes,
yeah,
they were a now extinct version of a forest elephant that was a bit smaller than the big African elephants of today, but looked otherwise reasonably similar, more similar to a modern African than to a modern Indian. So they would still have been pretty big. Big enough to make you go, ooh, I want to be somewhere else.
Indeed, and at that, in the ancient world, in India, they did use elephants for various things, didn't they? They did have sort of castly things on their backs, I believe.
howdah.
Yes, exactly, the howdah, that's it. And, you know, so to answer the question for the 19th century, they were used like tractors, essentially. So famously in the Indian Mutiny, they used them for pulling large guns. So the mutineers that, for some part, they had some very old guns, old Indian guns, 17th, 18th century guns. And some of them were so large, they had to be pulled either by an army of oxen or by elephants. There's one account I've read, rather grim, where the elephant was deliberately targeted by the British artillery team to stop the mutineers putting their gun in place. And there's another example I can think of where the elephants were actually used like bulldozers to knock down buildings. So absolutely, they were used like that. They weren't really used for fighting in
dragging
the 19th
things,
century.
lifting things under their tusks. And also on parade during the big durbas and so forth, you have nice parasol, and your gentry would get up there and wave.
And for hunting tigers and this sort of thing as well.
Hunting tigers out in India.
Yeah, that sounds like great fun. And also, less famously, they were used in Thailand as well, in a similar capacity to how they were used in India and other parts of Asia as well. So I hope that answers that question. That was a quite full
Titus.
Yes. So next up, Patty, no, that was Gallaglass. Gallaglass asked that question. Patty, number 4, ask him, I presume that means you, ask Lloyd if he has changed his stance on climate change being made up.
Being what? Being made up? How can it, does anyone, does that even mean anything? Made up? The climate has always been changing, that's pretty much indisputed.
Can we agree that climate does change?
Climate changes, and that's not made up because people go, oh, it was colder then, now it's warmer, so it must have changed.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, so
Lloyd does believe that climate does change.
It does change, and no one just made that up. That's based on like measurements and science and that.
So number 5 question from me is Kamil Shadkowski, I think, was what was the last time what was the last period when bows fully disappeared from European battlefields, and why? That's a big question.
I'm going to go with never. There are some eccentric commandos of World War II who used them. Norwegian resistance used bows and crossbows as well because they found it very difficult to get hold of guns quite often. So completely never. But I suppose as a mainstream, large formations of men using them in open battle, well, the Ottoman Turks were still using them well into the musketry period.
And there was a, as far as I know, relatively isolated case of Scottish bowmen in the English Civil War.
Right.
So they were still definitely using bows all over Europe, actually, in isolated pockets. But in the 17th century, bows were still, and obviously the Turks were still using them quite late. In Eastern Europe, if we go towards Russia and into Russia, the Tatars were still using bows in the 19th century. Certainly, if we go all the way to Asia, the British Army faced bows in China and in India. For the most part, most people in India were using matchlocks and flintlocks by that point, but there were some sort of tribes in more rural areas where they were still using bows. Certainly in places like Sarawak, they were still using blowpipes and bows. So yes, bows very much in the 19th century still. But European battlefields, the last European battlefield that I'm aware of where bows were still used, and probably there's probably examples from Eastern Europe that I don't know. In England, it would be the English Civil War. I suppose the second part of the question is why?
But why did they go out of use?
Yes, why did bows go out of use?
They're called guns.
And why are guns better than bows? Well, they kill more reliably.
They're terrifying. They make an incredibly loud noise. Morale is the main thing which decides whether a battle has been won or not, whether one side's morale cracks. You don't have to shoot everyone, you just have to terrify them. And if there are a load of guys there pointing things that you know can go bang and shoot a missile that you cannot possibly see or avoid, it's utterly terrifying. And there's nothing, we today hear the occasional musket being shot, but they were hearing hundreds of them being fired at a time, and it would have been utterly deafening and utterly terrifying. If you've got a bow and you hear that coming at you and you know that they're preparing for another volley, you want to be somewhere else.
The other thing I would say as well, firearms, so bullets out of a musket, they will sometimes go through the first person and into the second. Whereas an arrow has a more arced trajectory and is more likely to only hit one person. And if it does go through them, it will have lost all of its momentum and is unlikely to go through someone and wound someone else. Whereas musket balls and rifles, very often, if you've got people in ranks, will go through the person in the front rank and hit the person in the second rank. The other thing I would say is ease of use. Anybody watching this video or anybody here today, in about half an hour could be made a relatively effective musketeer, essentially, and could shoot opponents at 60, 80 yards away.
Yes, but there is an irony there, because the reason it takes ages to become good as an archer was because people were wearing so much armour that you had to shoot a very, very powerful bow, which was difficult. But you can actually get someone to twang reasonably accurately a not very powerful bow that would be enough to kill someone who's not in armour. And perhaps hence they didn't go out instantly.
Indeed, and arrows have some benefits as well in terms of penetration of certain types of material, but by and large firearms are more effective. That's the answer.
Guns.
Yes. So the next question, number 6 for my part, the 56 Project says, is the Bren gun better than the Spandau?
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Next question.
It looks nicer, I think. Number 7. I'm afraid I can't say this name because it's written in Cyrillic and I have no idea how to read a Russian name, but I think it's something like Anekchenko. I think that's Chenko.
No, a C is an S.
Okay.
Anyway,
You.
this name appearing on your screen now.
Yeah.
Editing.
What? Oh God, not editing. What weapons would a creature with 4 arms use? 2 shields and 2 swords? Or would it hold 2-handed weapons, top and bottom? Or would it even maybe use 4 weapons?
Right. Now, we of course are experts and would know the answer to this.
Fantasy weapons is where
I'm
it's at.
imagining, perhaps wrongly, but I'm imagining that it's bigger than a man. Or maybe it's a man,
Let's say man-size, because
So where are the extra? Has he got more torso and more arms up here?
I think sort of like 2 coming out at each
If he were
shoulder.
taller, it might work quite well if he has 2 shields at the bottom and then a spear going over the top.
That's true.
That would be pretty good.
Or a halberd held in 2 hands at the top. So you could have the 2 lower arms holding a pair of pavises.
Well, oh right, and he would
And
know
then
exactly
the
when he's
2
swinging, and they could.
that's
Aha!
I think I would
Aha!
go with that. So the 2 lower arms holding pavises,
Yeah.
but the 2 upper arms holding a halberd that
Which
you
would
could just
coordinate brilliantly because the same brain would know exactly when it's swinging. So shum shum.
Yeah.
See, you couldn't train 2 pavis holders so well.
The other option could be the upper set of arms could operate a bow, and
Right.
the lower set of arms could hold a shield and a hand weapon. So you could be shooting whilst in close combat.
Right. Or 2 Bren guns.
2 Bren guns or a Spandau. Number 8, Musky Elon, who's I have to say, Musky Elon, you're one of my favourite commenters on my channel, and I like to think that you are actually Elon Musk, and I really hope that you are, and I'm a big fan of your work. After the fall of Rome, it was a long time before a European government could field such a large, well-equipped military. That's true. What was the first Dark Age or medieval army that could have defeated Rome on the field of battle?
Right. So by Rome, we mean Rome at her absolute peak, presumably.
I guess so.
Because late Romans
Yes.
weren't that.
Well, they were Byzantines, really, weren't they? If we go late enough, they've just become
poor
Byzantines.
late Roman armies.
I mean, we could say obviously the Ottoman Turks defeated the Byzantines, so therefore the Ottoman Turks, we could say.
Is one answer. But I think maybe it's a more interesting question if you think Rome at its absolute height, when you've got professional legionaries in the field with heavy armour and large numbers of auxiliaries in mail and all the rest of it.
Difficult. I mean, something I've always thought is one way of neutralising a sort of 100 Years' War, Wars of the Roses English army, would have been with Roman shields. And if you just had a large formation of people with very large shields, they could have just walked towards longbowmen. And in fact, there was one French commander, I forget his name, who purchased lots of pavises with the intention of doing this, but never did it.
Yes, there is some quote about, I think it's attributed to Napoleon, but I'm not completely certain about this, where he talked about the number of French equipped with musket and bayonet that you needed to defeat so many barbarians in Africa, and he was saying that if it's 30 barbarians against 30 French, the French lose, but if it's 1,000 French, could beat 10,000. If you've got a decently large number of French, you could then fire in volleys enough to cover each other whilst they're reloading and so forth. Then the possibilities open up. So by the time you get well-drilled musketry armies, they could probably annihilate the Romans fairly efficiently.
Yeah, I mean, I would say definitely 17th century, because you've got pikemen, musketeers and cavalry. I think the sort of English Civil War or 30 Years' War armies could annihilate a Roman force with firepower alone, and with artillery, of course, because the Roman formations would just get mown through with cannon fire, wouldn't they? They're effectively in square.
And you would imagine again morale collapse because of the noise. They're just not used to it.
But any earlier than that, I'm not sure really any earlier than that a medieval army could have rivaled.
No, the improvement in steel is not that significant, and how well drilled the troops are, and the pilum, very effective, would still be very effective. Getting very close in with a pointy thing, even against well-armoured knights.
I mean, I think if you could field enough fully armoured knights or men-at-arms, then they could defeat a Roman force, but the Roman forces were so large compared to medieval armies.
The question talked about the size as well.
Yeah, so I think really we're looking at the 17th century.
So the
Maybe
high,
16th.
high imperial Rome at her mightiest would have lasted quite a long time.
Right, so number 9 question.
Ooh.
We're near to my final turn. So, SBaird42, if you were to participate in a feature film with an unlimited budget,
Oh wow.
what historical or fantasy setting would you most be excited to portray?
Oh, unlimited budget.
And when he says participate, he or she says participate, I presume that means actually be a character in as well.
Oh, right. I was thinking in terms of directing it, writing and directing it. It is actually quite difficult to beat the Second Punic War because you have an awful lot of different nationalities, an awful lot of different weapons and costumes and locations all around the Mediterranean. Loads of characters. It's got elephants, loads of cavalry. And you could have some enormous set pieces. And you got Cannae, of course, as one of the biggest ever battles. Which would be grisly, but a hell of a spectacle, and he did say infinite budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a movie point of view, one of the difficult things is do you do the sort of film where you view it from both sides, or is one side viewed as a goodie and one side, it's one of the reasons I think World War II is so useful, because it's so easy to portray one side as goodies and one side as baddies, and so many wars you can't really do that. The 100 Years' War, who are the goodies and the baddies in the 100 Years' War?
I think we should, making more use of our infinite budget, maybe we should do the Battle of Jutland with real ships. People would pay to see that.
But would it be a story that, how could you tell it?
Never mind the story, just think of the job creation scheme in the steel industry. We'd be heroes in Sheffield.
I think ancient world, for viewing spectacle, ancient world is probably where it's at, because as you say, the magnitude of the armies, things like elephants, chariots, something in Egypt, something in Assyria, I think very few films can ever broach those wars in any sort of realistic or visually impressive way because of the scale of it, although CGI is helping with that, of course.
And another thing which is nice about the ancient world is the chain of command is people actually talking to each other, actual characters. So it's not radios, it's not telephones, it's a guy riding up and yelling at someone, so you've got face-to-face relaying of orders and so forth that keeps up the momentum. So what
about a really, really good tank based film? So North Africa, wow. Alamein or
for sheer size,
Kursk. Yeah. That would be pretty good. And
I'd like to see like the O'Connor's rush across the desert has not been done in any film, and that would be pretty epic.
Yeah.
And the breakout from Cannes, where they formed massive columns of armour and just went at night straight through the German lines.
Have you seen Dunkirk yet?
I have seen Dunkirk, yes.
Good?
No, I did everything.
It's quite good in its way.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would be too long a question to throw in.
And number 10 question from me is, how would you say that? Pyrrhus?
Pyrrhus.
What period do you think is underrepresented in film? Mm-hmm. And he says, or she says, from my part, I think it's early 1800s America.
Oh, okay, so he's actually made it geographically specific as well.
Yeah, so...
period. Well, the so-called Dark Ages never actually gets portrayed as...
It gets a lot of,
as it actually
was. But there are a lot of Viking and King Arthur.
Nothing like Vikings, and King Arthur looks nothing like King Arthur. Actual Dark Age looking like the actual Dark Ages has never been done.
But I would argue that given the dearth of information about life in the Dark Ages, actually it's been treated quite a lot in film. Whereas, in contrast, there are many periods we have a huge amount of information about.
Right.
And there haven't been many films made about it. Partly, sometimes, so my view is no, I'm very interested in the Indian Mutiny. Oh. Hardly treated in film at all, because politically and culturally in all sorts of ways it's very difficult to make a movie about that, because it was just a horrible episode of history. Very interesting.
So still too soon. But is it too soon? And I'm happy we get the infinite budget, because if we have the infinite budget again, can we do the Battle of Kadesh, the biggest ever chariot engagement of all time? That could be good.
Yep, that could be good.
Loads of dust, and you got a big fortress.
I think
really big armies.
I think by and large the ancient world that isn't ancient Roman is not treated very often in films. So there's lots of Roman films, there's some Spartan and Greek films, not that many, but there's not very much of anything that's not Roman.
Yes, and this would be Bronze Age.
Oh,
So, yeah.
Prehistory rather than, that's...
Well, it's not because we know about the Battle of Kadesh because of written records, but it is the Bronze Age.
Have you seen 10,000 BC? They have saber-toothed tigers and pyramids being built with mammoths.
Clearly, I have missed out.
You must watch that film, it's very good. I think there's many periods, aren't there? Many periods and places that haven't been
We've given
treated.
you several answers,
Yes.
Pyrrhus.
Yes, you're lucky. Right, okay. Shall we move on to some different questions now?
Oh, right. So this could be the end of part 1. Or perhaps we will call this one More Questions and the other one More Questions, because possibly you saw my video or mine first, in which case you come here second, in which case this is more videos, or maybe you saw this one first, in which case you can go to my, and then that will be also appropriately called More Questions. Should we do that?
But for the other bit, see the link below.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. We have extra videos on Patreon and you can follow us on Facebook.